Hi everyone, my name's PK and here I have the lovely Bernadette Christie-David who is joining me today, and we're going to be talking and discussing self-managed super funds, SMSFs, if I get that correct. And I want to introduce Bernadette. I also want to let her introduce herself, but where this came from is actually I had interviewed and I had been interviewed by her husband and co-director of Atelier Wealth about, I think it was a year ago. His name is Aaron Christie-David, and I reached out to him because he sent me a jar of Marmite for Christmas. As I think he sent
It was
her. Oh,
Vegemite.
Vegemite, sorry, Vegemite, my mistake. And it was all customized because it had my name on it, like PK on it. And so I was like, oh, this is very thoughtful. And yeah, he's gone to a lot of trouble to, and I connected with him and I said, hey, do you want to come on and talk about SMSFs? Because I haven't discussed that for a while. And he said, no, actually, Bernie, my wife it would be much better. So that's where this connection came from. I'm very grateful for it. Welcome to the Oz Property Investment Mastery Podcast. My name's PK and I help busy people build passive income by buying top 5% growth and cash flow property and build a portfolio using data without wasting months doing research, spending weekends at inspection or catching flights, or dropping $10,000 to $20,000 on buyer's agents every single time. So if you're confused, lack confidence, and just overwhelmed with all the information and marketing misinformation available online and don't know where to start, then this show is for you. Bernadette, do you want me to call you Bernie or Bernadette?
30 is great. Thanks,
Bernie's
Pete.
great. Okay. Do you want to just take us through like maybe a quick background of who you are and how you got to where you are and what you're doing? But I just want to introduce the session as well for everyone so you can decide whether you want to stick around. We're going to be talking about what are SMSFs and why do people set them up, how much you need in your SMSF to buy a property, how the LVR or the loan ratio is different in an SMSF, how the borrowing capacity is different. So if you have maxed out your borrowing capacity personally, how you can still leverage SMSFs, who shouldn't buy an SMSF, and what's the process for actually doing so. So stick around, guys, if that rings a bell. Bernie, I'd love to also personally find out more about you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, PK. It's great to be here. So a little bit about my background. Studied Bachelor of Commerce at uni, accounting and HR, worked as a cadet accountant. So that's why SMSF comes so naturally, I think, to me, because it's the world of company and trusts and financials. And after working as a cadet accountant, moved into the corporate world, picked up human resources roles, and now have been working as a mortgage broker in Atelier Wealth for the last 7.5 years. So it's been quite a journey. My husband and I, Aaron, started the business from scratch, and we've been able to help a number of clients. And our particular lens is similar to your clients, PK. It's building that passive income through property. It's playing that investment journey and building those lifelong relationships with clients, because this is not something we do once and we hit the stop button. We keep going and going and learning, growing, making mistakes and moving forward. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool, cool. Well, I was just researching, not stalking, I promise, but I was just researching you guys this morning. And what I like, and maybe people can do this if they want, if you go to like Atelier Wealth's website and you go to like the people page, like our people, and you hover your like mouse over each person, like it goes from their like professional corporate type photo to like who they really are. And I hover over Aaron, who's a co-director, and he's looks like he's a chef, if I'm not mistaken. I hover over you and what is that, like an exercise thing?
That's right. It's a
Yeah.
Pilates, like a band. So I love
Mhm.
doing my Pilates in the background when I'm not looking after my two beautiful daughters as well. So
Awesome,
uh,
awesome. I love that concept. Cool. Well, let's get into it. I'm super grateful, by the way. So thank you in advance for your time. Let's just start from the start because I think this is not a well understood subject matter. What is an SMSF and why do people generally set them up?
of course. An SMSF, it is short for self-managed super fund. So everyone gets super paid if you're an employee. your employer will pay your super either to your retail super fund. So think something like Australian Super, Cbus, Hester, any of those sort of names. Or the alternative is you set up your own super fund called an SMSF, self-managed. And what it does, it's completely different to a retail fund. So a retail fund, your employer will pay the super contributions to the retail fund. They have, hundreds, thousands or thousands of accounts that they look after, and they have a set investment strategy depending on the sort of category of investor risk that you're aligned to. So you could be in a high growth, you could be in a medium term growth, or you could be in like a more of a safer option. And depending on what portfolio you've picked, the fund managers are going to make the investment decisions about where they're buying shares or bonds or index funds, whatever it might be. SMSF is basically the opposite end of that. You have complete access to the money in the SMSF. You literally get a bank account that you log into, and you can transfer money, pay your super bills, of course, not personal bills. And you make the investment decisions. So do you want to buy property? Do you want to buy shares? Do you want to buy crypto? You have the ultimate say.
Right, right. So I guess it's like, obviously none of this is financial advice, but the way that when I set mine up and the way that I think about it and my wife, we think about it, is that if we think we can do a better job of managing our money than the fund managers or whatever, then it's probably a good idea to set up a self-managed super fund. You manage it yourself. But if you don't think you can do a better job, obviously this is very basic, there's more to it, then you probably just outsource it to those people. And I was just having a discussion, it's kind of tangential, with a buddy of mine. He's a developer, and I was talking to him this morning, and we're talking about how a lot of these institutional funds are investing in like REITs and retail assets and in office space, yielding like under 5%. And, they have to, because every year they get more money put into their fund because everyone's paying super into these institutional super funds. And they charge a management fee, so they have to be active. And they're just getting money, so they have to put the money somewhere. They can't just leave it in the bond market or leave it in the bank earning a fixed income. And so even if the asset is not that great, like let's say a 4% or 3% yielding office space with a vacancy of more than 17%, they still have to do it. No offense to anyone who is much smarter than me and actually does that stuff, by the way, but there's just kind of one way that I look at it. It's like, okay, should I or could I invest that money, my money, better myself? And I came to the conclusion that I could. I don't know if I have, but I think at least back then I came to the conclusion that I could, and I managed it myself. Does that make sense? Is that kind of congruent with your thoughts as well, Bernie?
Absolutely. And we set up our own SMSF for the same reasons. And it's sort of like it's sort of like two ways you need to look at it. It's you do need the time. So you need to educate yourself. You need to invest the time that it takes to manage and administer the fund. You need to be thinking about the investments, and is your money being best placed into whatever asset classes you've picked. So you have to, one, have that time dedicated. So if you don't have that time, you don't have the desire to learn, educate yourself, try those things, stay with a retail fund. Like that makes a lot of sense. And then the other part of it as well, like you said, with these sort of fund managers, they have to be seen to be doing something. Is it necessarily in your best interest? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But when you're managing your own fund, if you make the right decision or a good decision, it directly impacts you. So instead of getting, say, 4% on a vacant, office building, you could be getting, you could buy a property that has, I don't know, 10% capital growth in a year, plus rental income returns. So, it's for you to weigh up, how much do you want to own and control that decision making?
Right, right. And like I always I get asked this question, and I'm not a financial advisor per se, so I can't answer it specifically. But I always get asked this question, like, okay, PK, you talked about SMSFs. How much do I actually need in my super to make it worthwhile for me to bite the bullet, transfer it into like a trust and in my own control. Can I buy a property with $100,000 in my SMSF? Can I buy a property? Do I need 200K? Is there regulations around it? Would you be able to sort of demystify that for us, Bernie? Because obviously you guys have written a lot of loans under SMSFs, I would presume, and like hundreds of clients of mine have also bought through SMSFs, but you still talk to like 10 different accountants and they give you different answers. Like, what's your take on this?
Absolutely. So the short answer is there's no limit of how much cash you need in your SMSF to be able to set it up and then get a loan and buy a property. But what we do need to understand is one, like, what do the lenders say? So the lenders are all different. Some lenders, they say, we don't care how much cash you have, as long as your super contributions and the rent can pay the loan, we'll give it to you. So that means you possibly could buy a $400,000 property. Some banks have a minimum requirement. So they might say you need to have $120,000 in cash, 150, 200. And so that's very lender dependent and very time specific dependent, because they can change their policies. But right now, we don't need any minimum. So it's really about a good starting point and what that recommendation is. I would say you'd be needing to at least have about 120 as a minimum. It's a good starting point. That would cover like a 20% deposit and costs roughly for, say, maybe a $500,000 property. So that's probably a good starting point.
Right, right. And so is 20% like the maximum, or rather, I should say the minimum deposit, or is there such thing as lender's mortgage insurance? Can you put down a 10 or 12, 15% deposit in an SMSF?
I wish you could. But so for this stage for residential, 20% deposit is the just minimum that you need to put in. They don't allow you to access lender's mortgage insurance, so we have to stick to that. Commercial's a little different in your SMSF. Lenders find it a little riskier, therefore they would need you to give a little bit more of a deposit. So usually you're looking at about 30% deposit.
Right. And is there any like regulations? So I get the whether it's 120 or 150 or 200, that's more like bank led according to their policies. Is there
Yes.
any like more government type safety or regulations to avoid people throwing their money away or making bad decisions that says, all right, if you use 100K for a deposit, let's say buying a 400K property or whatever, you need to at least have 20,000 extra in your SMSF for holding costs or emergencies or something? Like, is there any buffer that any regulatory body enforces?
Yeah, so there's no government mandated or legislated amounts that you need to keep in your SMSF as a minimum. It is bank specific. So that cash buffer that you're talking about, the banks refer to it as a liquidity test. So some banks need you to keep a certain amount of money in your SMSF after the property has settled. So after you get the loan approved settlement. At the moment, there are a couple of banks that require no liquidity test. So you could literally, put everything in, buy this property and have $1,000 left. Would I recommend that you do that? Absolutely not. I mean, depending on, the asset that you've bought, if it's resi or commercial, what the rental income that you've expected and your associated costs for the property, we could work together to get some sort of like buffer that you feel safe with.
Right.
It might be 10, it might be 20K that you want in there as a buffer. Just depends on everyone's level of risk.
Right, right. And I'm just asking this question just because I know people will be new to the subject and probably want to ask. Let's say you do for some reason only have 5 or 10K buffer, like as a liquidity test. And you're buying a set and forget sort of residential property, and one day the property manager calls and says there's like a massive roof leaking issue. We've got a couple of quotes. It's going to cost $20,000 to fix. What does an investor do? I mean, you don't have 20,000 liquid in your SMSF. Can you like pay for it outside? I'm just asking for the sake of asking, can you pay for it outside of your super with your personal funds, or what happens then?
Great. It's a great question. So there's two things. Well, if you're getting a loan in your SMSF, the banks need you to get insurance. So you'll either, if it's an apartment, you'll have strata insurance, and hopefully that would cover most of it.
Hmm.
Or if it's a home, you would have building insurance. So that should cover majority of the cost. If, however, for whatever reason, insurance doesn't cover the costs and you're still 20K short,
Yeah.
and your SMSF does not have that money, you have an obligation as the trustee of the super fund to make sure that your super fund can pay that bill. So you would need to find a way to kick in that extra money, be it 20K, into the SMSF. So that might be savings you have in your individual name. You might not have that much in savings. So where are we going to get that money from for you? The last 7.5 years of writing SMSF loans, I haven't had a situation like that.
Oh, good.
So that's good. But it is always super important to go, okay, like worst case scenario, like if this happened, what are my obligations? And
Right.
you would need to get the money into your SMSF somehow.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that's good to know because I know there's lots of regulations around how much you can voluntarily contribute to your super, your SMSF, and things like that. So I suppose you just need to navigate through those regulations as well, right?
Absolutely. And then there's two types of contributions that you make into your SMSF. So one is called a concessional contribution,
Hmm.
and the other is called a non-concessional contribution. So concessional is salary sacrificed. It's usually comes out of your pay pre-tax, goes into your super fund, tax at 15%. Or the other option is the non-concessional contributions, which is your after-tax money. So
Hmm.
money you've just saved or however you've gotten access to those funds.
Hmm.
And then those concessional and non-concessional contributions each have a different limit.
Right, right. Okay, that's good to know. So all's not lost. If you do come into that unlikely scenario, you can probably get out of it. But just make sure you understand those non-concessional and concessional
Limit,
policies.
yes.
Okay, cool. And I don't know the exact legislation or rule, but I've always understood that if you buy real estate as an investment in your SMSF, there's limitations around how much you can add value. Like let's say there's a granny flat potential, or let's say you can subdivide the land and build another house next door, or let's say you can build upwards. There's various things that you can't do as well, right? Under a SMSF, would you be able to maybe just step us through that? Because maybe SMSFs aren't for everyone, and maybe this will help people sort of think, okay, well, actually, granny flats are my strategy, or subdividing is my strategy, or whatever, and I physically can't do that because it's not allowed in an SMSF.
Yeah, correct. So um, the legislation is quite strict around construction and renovations to property and all of the things that you've mentioned. So when we first buy an asset, it has to meet the single acquirable asset rule. So
Okay.
it must be its own property, house, apartment, and any changes that you make to it. So there are cosmetic changes that you can make. Think like painting the walls, relaying new carpet or tiles. But once you start to construct, that's where it's a big no-no.
Right, right. So like this is maybe a pretty base question, but like what if someone doesn't know this and they contact a handyman or a draftsman and the builder or whatever, and they build a shed out back? Like what then? What happens then?
Absolutely. I think that's why before you do anything to an SMSF property or before you buy it and you've got plans to do those things, it's really important to get advice.
Yep.
So contact your accountant, financial planner, whoever is those go-to people in your circle.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that what you're doing is allowed. Because if you do not meet the obligations,
Uh-huh.
as the trustee of the SMSF, you can get into a lot of trouble with the ATO.
Okay. So you're not going to jail, but there's like a fine or something that they'll
That's
put on
right.
you.
You're not going to jail to put a shed out the back, but you might get a fine. That's right.
Okay, okay, good to know, good to know. Um, and like for a new property investor, when someone says, okay, SMSFs may be a good idea for you, go talk to your accountant or go talk to your financial advisor or go talk to your mortgage broker. Like, it can be really daunting and overwhelming. It's like, I don't really even know what like the difference between a financial advisor, an accountant, or a mortgage broker. So maybe that's what they're thinking. Who is the right Is it someone like you who's a broker, or should they go to an accountant first, or like, do they need a proper statement of advice from a financial advisor? What's the process?
It's such a great question, and I think when we get to this stage of investing in SMSF, we have to acknowledge that we now need the support network. We
Hmm.
need the team.
Yeah.
So we need a combination of, if not all, some of those people. So in terms of a mortgage broker is going to be able to assist you in how much you can borrow and how much money you're going to need to kick in to make this purchase work, and what are the ongoing obligations in terms of your repayments. An accountant is going to assist you in setting up the trust, setting up the corporate trustee, managing and doing your tax returns every year. So that's sort of their role. And then a financial planner is someone that's going to come in, have a look at your entire situation, and then give you advice. Now, do you need a financial planner to set up an SMSF? Not necessarily. And the lenders don't necessarily need you to see that you have a statement of advice either at the moment.
Okay.
So you can go, hey, this is something I'm going to control and do because I have aspirations to invest in these assets. You can go to your accountant, get everything set up, trusts, corporate trustees. Then you'd speak to a SMSF specialized mortgage broker, find out what are the rates, how much can I borrow? And then they'd be the two sort of people, along with some sort of conveyancer or solicitor that understands SMSF property purchases.
Right, right. So is it fair to say, like, let's say I don't have a SMSF, and I've sort of tapped out my borrowing capacity under my own name or other entities, which is actually what happens a lot with my clients. Like, they might buy numerous properties under their wife or spouse's names and their own names or entities, and they tap out on borrowing capacity, and they kind of hear through the grapevine property circles that even after you're tapped out externally within a SMSF, you can still get borrowing capacity. And so that kind of gives them a new lease on life, and they become
Yeah.
happy again because they can buy
I
more
can get more
properties.
debt.
Yeah, because they can swim in more good debt.
That's right.
And so they become like excited again. So is the very next step for them to like go to an accountant, get that corporate trustee, that trust set up, and then they come to a mortgage broker? Or should they go to a broker first and say, I'm planning to set up a SMSF. If I go to an accountant and set this up, will I have enough borrowing capacity? Like, what's the order?
It depends on who you are, but I always suggest, and I'm biased, of course, that you come and speak to a broker first.
Right, right, right.
And the reason is, you might have aspirations to buy an $800,000 property. We run your numbers and we're like, you can only buy it 500. That might make you reconsider buying or setting up that SMSF, because SMSF, it does cost money to set up. You need to pay the accountant for the trustee, to set up the corporate trustee. So you're looking anywhere from sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 grand, depending on your accountant's fees.
Hmm.
So before you outlay all of that money, I think it's really important to understand, can I actually achieve the loan and the property goals that I want to upfront? So I always recommend speaking to a broker. They sort of give you a bit of a tick. So it's hard to get a pre-approval if the SMSF is not set up. But
Right.
what we can do is look at the income that's coming into the super fund. And it's quite simple. A super fund, like you mentioned, when you've maxed out in individual capacity, an SMSF is looked at as a completely separate entity. So even though you own it, technically, you're the end beneficiary, they don't look at anything from an individual capacity. So they look at the super contributions that come in for you, for the other members, maybe your partner. They look at the proposed rental income that will come in, and then they'll say, okay, this is how much you can borrow. And it's perfect for people once they start to go, hey, I'm capping out from an individual point of view.
Yeah.
And I really want to, go again,
Yeah,
get
yeah,
more,
yeah.
get more good debt.
Yeah. It's preach it. I try to preach this thing of good debt. It doesn't always go down too
Absolutely.
well,
And
but
if it's leverage debt,
yeah.
you're getting rental income for it. And I
It,
think the other thing, PK, that I love about it is At the moment, like early 2024, if you're in your individual name and you're trying to get servicing or a loan, whatever your sort of income is combined, if you
Mhm.
times it by 4.5, that's typically what a bank is going to lend to you at the moment. Okay.
Yep.
So say you're on 200,000 times 4.5, what's that, 800 and 900? Is that
Yep.
about right?
Yep.
SMSF, they actually give you a much larger multiple. So whatever your super contributions are and the rental income, add that together and times it by 9.
Okay. Because
That is,
that was actually going to be my question. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure I
yeah,
understand this before we go on. All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, like, let's just take this is not an average person, but for some reason I'm calling it an average family. Let's say
Yep,
they husband and wife or whatever, they have a joint SMSF, which you can do by the way.
yep, yep,
And let's say the household income is, let's say 200K. I'm just making this
yep,
up.
yep,
And
200.
s- and so let's say 10% of that is super. I'm just using 10% for round
Yep,
numbers. So
yep,
that's 20K
yep.
per year. Because my question was going to be like, if 20K was your annual income, the bank would be like no dice, right? You're not getting any
They'd be
loans.
like, sorry, no, thank you, move on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you would be too, but in a much more polite and nicer way. But the 20K gets you much further in a SMSF. And so
Yes,
that plus, let's say you buy a 350, 400K property, you're getting 20K gross rent every year.
yep,
So
yep.
am I right in saying 20K super contribution, 20K gross rent is 40K, 40K times that multiplier is your borrowing capacity
That's right, in your SMSF.
in your
You'd
SMSF?
be able to get 360 for a loan, roughly.
Uh-huh.
If you were doing that, if say you had 40K in your individual name, 4.5, you'd be able to get 180. So we're basically able to double our borrowing power and our capacity in the SMSF as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what's the catch? Like, everyone knows that to build long-term wealth, leverage in a well measured and calculated way is a fantastic approach. Using other people's money to get ahead. We do that obviously outside of SMSF. It's called good debt. That's how real estate investors have been doing it for decades. That seems that there's more abundance of that good debt within an SMSF. There's more appetite for the bank to give you that good debt in terms of a multiplier. What's the
Mm.
catch? Like, is the LVR lower? Like, do they require more of a deposit as a proportion
Mhm.
of the property purchase, or is the interest rate like really much higher?
Yeah, I think both of those things. So the max in terms of a loan that they would give you in your SMSF is usually 80% for residential property,
Uh-huh.
whereas if you're an individual, you can go up to maybe 90 or 95%, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the rates are higher. Absolutely. So SMSFs, they take a little bit more time for the banks to administer and regulate. So because of that, they say this costs us more to manage. We're going to charge that cost onto you as the consumer. So
Right.
rates are typically sort of like 1 to 1.5 more, like 1% more
Right.
than current investment rates.
Mm-hmm.
But like we know, the tax advantages of an SMSF are so advantageous that paying a little bit extra in interest when you're only getting taxed 15% in the super during that accumulation phase, that sort of balances it out.
Got it. Got it. And are there like second tier, third tier lenders for SMSF lending as well? Like do First Mac do Pepper Money? Do these guys do, or is it just big four banks that are doing SMSF lending?
Yeah, big four banks used to do it. So about maybe like 5 years ago now, they were the big players. So
Uh-huh.
Macquarie, St. George, CBA, they all offered it. Then they all pulled out. They said it became too expensive. So we are speaking to what they call non-bank lenders, all those lenders you mentioned, PK.
Mm-hmm.
First Mac, Pepper, Blue Bay, all of those sort of like non-bank lenders. Yeah.
Why do they pull out? Like, surely it's good business, right?
I thought so as well, but their reasons were it's too costly for us to administer. There's trust deeds you need to review. There's multiple
Mm-hmm.
entities. There's guarantors. So all of those things just require more to manage.
Right. I don't know if I buy that. I mean, I'm not like I don't work
I
for a big
know.
four bank, but it doesn't that it seems a bit strange that that's their rationale. I mean, given how much they could make, but I'm sure they've thought it through and the profit margin is perhaps not there.
I mean, that's
Um,
the only reason you can think they would pull out because the profit wasn't there for them. But if they're
yeah.
charging an extra 1 or 1.5% more, then surely they would make that up.
Yeah, just seems a bit, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, okay, so that makes sense. And then in terms of like actual buying process, so let's say I've spoke with you, Bernie, and you've told me, yeah, PK, you have enough borrowing capacity for 500, 400K property in SMSF. That makes me really excited. I go to my accountant, we set up SMSF, which in my experience, I don't know what your experience has been. It's like, it does sort of take 1 or 2 months,
Yep.
generally
Yep.
speaking.
I would agree with that.
Um, yeah. And I set that up, I'm patient. And then like I found the really good property. I've done my suburb research. I've found the right street, the right property. Um, I'm going into the process of making offers. One offer has been accepted, and I've been sent the contract of sale. The agent's like, you get it to me by 5 p.m. tonight. The property is yours. Of course, it's not unconditional yet, but exchange of contracts. Like, how from that point to settlement, how much is it different in terms of the process of buying in a SMSF versus outside the SMSF?
Hmm. Well, the first part of that is when you go to make an offer on the property, the purchaser will not be the SMSF. The purchaser will be a bare trust. So that bare trust, usually depending on the state you buy in, needs to be signed, like created and signed on the day of the purchase or the day after. So it depends on the state. So you have
Hmm.
to confirm that with your conveyancer solicitor. So that's step one. So go and make an offer on a property. You put it in your name, PK, or I put in my name as an individual. For an SMSF, we have to be very careful, one, about the name that we put on the contract of sale.
Interesting.
If you put the incorrect name, so if you put your SMSF's name on the contract of sale, you go through, it doesn't get picked up, for example, uh, and it's found to be set up incorrectly, you could pay double stamp duty.
Okay.
So we want to avoid that.
Right. Can I just clarify? Because I don't think I understood it genuinely. Um, so the day the contract is exchanged, it's that day or the day after that the bear trust um, has to be established. Like you can't establish it in advance. Is that what you're saying, or did I misunderstand it?
Yeah, so you can set it up in advance, but you
Mhm.
can't sign that the trust has been created until the day that you until the day of the contract date.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. So you can have like you can tell your accountant, hey, we're going to be buying a property in our SMSF.
Hmm.
We're going to be using a loan, therefore we need to set up a bare trust. They'll go, great, this is our template. They'll create that, they'll have that sitting there, but you don't sign that until the day of or the day after. It depends on the state, so you've got to get specific advice.
Right, right. Okay. And so let's assume we've done that. And we've now gone and done the building and pest inspection. We've worked with you guys and we've got our finance approved. Actually, just on that, before we go unconditional, we need our finance approved. Is that like a more cumbersome process in an SMSF?
It is a little bit. I think
Yeah.
you used the word before, PK, patience.
Yeah.
SMSF requires patience, understanding that there are a lot of boxes to tick, a lot of forms to sign. So it does take longer because we have a limited number of lenders as well that actually offer these loans. They
Hmm.
often, their service level times run out a little bit longer than you would expect.
Hmm.
So yes, so all of those things you mentioned. So we've done our building and pests, we've done the valuation, we send back the contract valuation to the lender and then they issue formal approval.
Right.
The next part is similar again to buying a residential property, that bank will issue you loan documents and you'll sign those. These loan documents though, instead of getting maybe 4 or 5 different documents to sign, it could be anywhere from sort of like 10 to 15 documents that you need to sign.
Like physically, or can you docu-sign these things these days?
These ones are physical, so
Okay.
we're printing it out. It's old school, wet signatures. Hopefully, we'll get there with the DocuSign.
Right, right, right.
And then some lenders do require you to get legal advice. So that's important to know.
Okay. And so what does that, I know you're not a lawyer per se, but what does that mean? Like you have to go back to your is it the conveyancer's job to then look through all those documents?
It's usually it's not a conveyancer, it is a solicitor. So they require you to usually make an appointment. Some solicitors do meet over Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
go through all of the loan documents. They obviously charge you for that, for their time, because it's a good amount of time.
Yeah.
So just being aware that that is a step. So if you've got a really tight like settlement date, maybe you've negotiated, found a great property, and you've negotiated a really quick settlement.
Yeah.
You don't typically want to do that with an SMSF. You want to give yourself a little bit of extra time, just because we do need to possibly get legal advice, obviously making an appointment with a solicitor,
Right.
finding your schedule, signing everything, getting it back to the bank, getting it all checked off.
Right. 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 It even though I've gone through this process before, it just seems like really daunting. Like I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who's like completely new. Like,
Yeah.
is it really quite overwhelming or what's your experience? I don't know if you guys have bought property through your own SMSF or for clients, obviously. Does it end up being quite smooth? Like, can a new property investor do it, or do you reckon it's best for like only those who are experienced?
Mm. I don't think necessarily you have to only be experienced. But I do believe, so say you're a new investor, you can do it 100%, but you have to be willing to learn and
Hmm.
educate yourself and do
Hmm.
research, find the right people around you that are going to be able to give you, you can ask those questions, oh, like, hey, sorry, it's another silly question I've got. It's like, no, it's never a silly question. You're new at this. We do this daily. We're here to help. So for me, it's like, you don't necessarily have to be experienced, but you do have to have an attitude and a mindset that you're willing to learn and educate yourself and ask the right questions.
Right, right. I think that's so well said because when I was going through the process, I heavily lent on my accountant who I trusted and they kind of yeah, literally I was asking silly questions and even just to roll over my funds from I think it was like
Yeah.
Australia Super or something. It took like ages and I was like, is this really happening? And I just like was asking these questions and I think that helped me overcome my nerves. So I think for anyone who's considering doing this, find a terrific mortgage broker or accountant. Obviously Bernie does this day in, day out, but like just someone who has time in the day for you, like, not someone who's transactional, someone who's going to be like, okay, not reply to emails within an hour, but at least reply to them within a reasonable period of time. And then you can kind of overcome those nerves. And have you found Bernie that the clients who have bought, like, were they happy that they went through the process, albeit a little bit fatter process, and then they were quite happy with the purchase and then what the property's performance was?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the people who have bought the right property, so like
Mhm.
PK yourself, like all the work that you do, people who have bought the right property, they see the benefit of that, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's for people who really, it's that control element. It's like,
Mm.
I made this decision, I got the loan, bought this property. Now the extra money is either sitting in an offset account in the SMSF or I'm investing it in shares. And they're seeing it grow. And it's growth that is fueling your retirement. And you think about that time, whenever it might be, but it's like, oh, now I can do this holiday. Like now I can do this, annual overseas holiday because I've made the right investment decisions now. And it's the
Mhm.
compounding effect, like which we all know. We
Yeah.
make these decisions now, those good decisions compound, those financial returns compound year on year on year. And then we get to 60 or 65 and we're like, we're sweet.
Yeah, yeah. And the best thing is like, you know, it's not affecting your lifestyle because it's in your super. It's like that money would have been like ghost money to you now anyway, so you might
You
as
wouldn't
well
have
make
seen
it
it.
tangible.
You wouldn't even thought of it until you get your retail, end of financial year summary statement. You're like, oh, that's great. Okay. And you chuck it in the bin. But now
Yeah.
you're a little bit more invested. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's wonderful.
No, I love that. And especially, of course, this episodes will go out to my podcast. Thank you everyone for listening and YouTube and Facebook group but for those of you who are clients or want to become clients or whatever, I know you guys have like a more of a DIY tendency. You actually want to be the masters of your own destiny because you understand no one cares about your money as much as you do. So I think it's especially for these types of people who are motivated that SMSFs can be quite powerful. Because, like you said, Bernie, it's for people who really want to, like, sink their teeth into their own wealth creation and make it happen, and not just let someone else hopefully take care of it. Of course, it's not for everyone, like you've well established as well. But I think people like you, Bernie, good mortgage brokers, brokers who have time for their clients, brokers who are not transactional but strategic and in it for the long term, and have obviously written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of loans in this way. I think these are the types of people that you guys should be reaching out to, especially if you're new, or doubly especially if you haven't even bought property yet, because it is quite daunting initially.
Absolutely. And
Um,
yeah, it's all of those things, PK, everything you've said. Yeah.
right. And I mean, was there any like last words of wisdom or pieces of advice that you can give around the SMSF space, maybe from your own experience, like yourself and your husband, or from what you've seen clients do really well, or perhaps trip up on? Like, is there anything that we can learn off others' mistakes, so to speak?
Absolutely. I think there's one advanced tip that I
Uh-huh.
like to give. So it is quite specific, but I've seen a couple of my clients do this incredibly well. So it is for people that own commercial property and they own commercial property in their individual names. So there is actually some rulings or legislation around the fact that you can transfer commercial property to your SMSF via what they call an in specie transfer or contribution. Now, why would someone do this? And I think the main reason really is the tax benefits. So if you've got a commercial property and it's earning X amount, and you won't own the company, you're paying 30% tax. If you can transfer that property into your SMSF, you're going to reduce the tax you pay on the rental income, but then also the capital gain as well if you ever sell it. So this is more of an advanced tip. I don't know if it's quite hit the spot, but something people talk to me about is like, I own a business, premises, a commercial property. What can I do?
Hmm.
That's definitely something I've seen more of my savvier investors do.
Right.
And, obviously that's through the support of a financial planner.
Right. Is that like, do you mean transfer that like without paying stamp duty? Is that what you're suggesting, or you'd pay stamp duty?
There's no stamp duty payable to my
Yeah.
understanding.
That's so crazy. I didn't even know about that. That's like a massive loophole. I don't know if it's a
It's a
loophole,
massive
but
loophole,
yeah.
and sadly, you cannot do it for residential property.
Yeah. Otherwise, just about like 1 year before someone retires, they just transfer everything into there. So
You just be like, "What?"
yeah, it's like cha-ching, no tax. No. Um,
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
that doesn't seem, I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's something not right about it, because it's like that's too good to be true. Maybe it's one of those cases where it is actually good and
it
true at the same time.
it is. So I've had a couple of my clients that have done this, and then I remember the first one I saw, I'm like, "You can't do this, like, what
Hmm.
is this?" And it's like, "Yeah, you can."
Okay, well, there you go. For if anyone who's watching or listening has made it this far, it was well worth your time. And yeah, we'll send you bank details. You can send us some money, because we just say, well, not me, Bernie's just saved you hundreds of thousands.
Hey, I'll share it, PK, thank you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I really appreciate your time, Bernie. It was really good to have you on, and it's cool. I've never done like an interview with like the husband and the wife later on. It's cool that you guys like a couple and doing the finance business together. I forget right now the name of your podcast. You want to give it a quick shout out?
Absolutely. So Aaron's got his podcast, the Australian Property Investment Podcast.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah. A great podcast, great name as well, great for SEO. I'm very envious of it. I thought I wish I named my podcast that, but no, it's a great one. Go check it out, guys. And once again, Bernie, I think it's good to have information and knowledge, but it's also good to get it from someone who's sort of down to earth and practical and just relatable. So hopefully a bunch of people connect with you afterwards, or at least you provided a ton of value to them.
Thank you so much, PK. I really appreciate the opportunity and just sharing everything property and SMSF related. So thank you again.
Thanks so much. And thank you for watching or listening, guys. I really appreciate having you as part of my community. Please hit the subscribe button, give it a like. And lastly, if you want like a part B, or if you want like even more of a deep dive, Bernie was suggesting before we hit record, hey, why don't we do like a whiteboarding session where we can like visually concept up, some of these things that we're talking about. If you guys want that, please leave a yes below. Obviously, you can't do that on the podcast, but on the Facebook group or the YouTube community, leave a yes, and then we can explore going into a part B. Thanks for listening. Thank you again, Bernie.